Today, we're diving into an animal that honestly feels way more like a myth than a modern pet. I'm talking about the Alabai. You might also know them as the Central Asian Shepherd. This is a dog of truly ancient lineage and, well, raw, uncompromising power. If you're fascinated by working dogs with deep, incredible histories, you are definitely in for a treat today. Let's just jump right in and see what makes this majestic giant tick.
Okay, here's our roadmap for the explainer. We're going to start with their ancient origins and sheer scale, then look into their independent guardian mind. After that, we'll talk about fueling the giant, cover health and maintenance, and finally, wrap up with global restrictions and laws.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Ancient Origins and Scale.
Get this, the males can reach a staggering 170 pounds. I mean, just picture a dog that size. But you have to understand, that massive scale, it wasn't bred into them for the show ring, not at all. It's the result of a 4,000-year history working alongside nomadic tribes across the vast, brutal terrains of Central Asia. Their sheer size is literally thousands of years of natural selection at work, surviving some of the harshest environmental pressures on Earth.
Because of that history, they actually earned the Russian name Turkmensky Volkodidav, which literally translates to wolf crusher. How wild is that? That brutal title points directly to what they were originally meant to do. They weren't just happily herding sheep, they were independent guardians. They deliberately placed themselves right between their livestock and heavy predators. We're talking wolves, snow leopards, bears. They absolutely had to be tough, fearless, and capable of neutralizing immense threats.
Now, if you look at their surface anatomy, you'll notice this powerfully built rectangular body. They're actually slightly longer than they are tall. So this isn't some delicate giant. It's built purely for endurance and power. See that broad, deep chest and the straight back? That is a design all about stamina rather than flashy speed.
And moving to the head, you can really see the massive, moderately rounded skull and that broad muzzle. It gives them this commanding, almost bear-like presence, right? It's a very deliberate design for a frontline protector. Those exceptionally heavy jaws were built specifically for that ancient role of taking on massive predators. You'll also notice this thick, exceptionally strong neck, which is usually covered by a really dense natural mane or ruff. Historically, that thick fur wasn't just for looks, it served a vital, life-saving purpose. It protected their vulnerable throat areas during deadly combat with those large predators. Literally, every single inch of this animal is designed for pure survival. All right, moving on to Section 2, the independent guardian mind.
So if you're ever considering living with one of these giants, there is a stark, almost unbelievable contrast you need to know about. With you and your family, they're incredibly devoted, warm, and honestly surprisingly gentle. But flip the coin, and with strangers or unfamiliar dogs, they are deeply suspicious and fiercely territorial. They hold this calm, confident, defensive posture, constantly evaluating newcomers to see if they're a threat to their flock or their family. You see, because they evolved to work totally independently, sometimes without human supervision for days at a time, they aren't just going to blindly follow your commands. They have their own judgment. The real secret here is viewing training through the lens that stress removal equals cooperation. Instead of forceful dominance, if you offer calm authority and remove environmental stressors, that is how you earn their respect. And once you establish that trust, you gain an incredibly reliable partner.
Which brings us to Section 3, fueling the giant. Guys, the dietary volume required to feed an Alabai is just wild. We're talking up to 2 whole liters of meat broth per meal, and that's twice a day. Plus, it's mixed with carbohydrates. Alongside that literal ocean of broth, you feed them safe proteins like boiled or raw beef, veal, and chicken. You can even supplement it all with specific fruits like apples and pears or dairy products and eggs to give them vital calcium. It is a massive undertaking. But you can't just feed them anything. There are strict dietary rules here. You absolutely have to avoid pork entirely, simply because their digestive tracts just can't easily absorb the fat. Never, ever give them chicken bones. Those powerful jaws will just splinter them and create a severe choking hazard. You also want to skip heavily spiced foods completely because it actually ruins their crucial sense of smell. And surprisingly enough, you should avoid giving them raw vegetables in the summer to prevent painful intestinal gas.
And feeding them isn't just about what goes in the bowl. It's a highly seasonal process. You have to transition their diet really gradually to avoid upsetting their system. You basically have to cleverly adjust their menu based on the extreme weather they were bred to endure. So, in the harsh winter, you bump up the carbohydrates and proteins to keep them fueled. Then, when summer rolls around, you shift gears, relying more on safe, specific veggies like raw zucchini and carrots. Okay, let's look at Section 4, Health and Maintenance. When it comes to their medical needs, strict weight management is absolutely vital to prevent hip dysplasia, which, as you can imagine, is a major risk given their sheer size. Breeders also have to actively test for DEB, that's dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa, which is a severe, incurable hereditary skin condition requiring intense lifelong care. And naturally, cardiac screenings are highly recommended. I mean, keeping a 170-pound body running puts an enormous demand on a dog's heart. But here is what genuinely amazed me about this breed: their longevity. You know, giant breeds usually suffer from tragically short lifespans, but actually, if an Alabai's weight and joints are managed well right from puppyhood, they boast an incredibly long lifespan of 12 to 15 years. That is a massive testament to the rugged resilience that was bred into them over thousands of years out on the steppe. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Global Restrictions and Laws. Because of their immense size and those deep-rooted guarding instincts, the legislation surrounding the Alabai varies wildly around the world. For instance, Denmark enacted severe bans and breeding restrictions spanning from 1991 to 2010. Over in the United Arab Emirates, they heavily restricted importation starting in 2008. Belarus requires strict ownership conditions and mandatory training certificates, with even tighter laws coming into effect in 2025. And more recently, in 2023, Egypt enacted a law completely prohibiting the breed. Even in places where they are perfectly legal, owners often face heavy licensing, high fence requirements, and mandatory muzzling in public. So, the ultimate question I want to leave you with is this. Knowing their 4,000-year-old instinct to guard independently, understanding those massive dietary and spatial needs, and seeing their strict legal status across the globe, are you truly equipped to bring an ancient, independent giant into the modern world? It is an absolutely incredible animal, but it demands an extraordinary owner. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.